Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversry.
Yes.
We are doing great because we've made it for 100 podcasts.
100th episode.
Yeah, this has really
The
been...
time has gone quick.
It has gone quick, and it's especially kind of, it almost seems like it just started because we started in mid-February.
Yes,
of
2 years ago.
And we started in a different place. We're into our third studio now. And, but it's gone by quick, it seems like. But I think that's because it's been fun for me and hopefully for you too.
Oh, it has. Gosh, the time has gone quickly. And so many of these podcasts have just been so enjoyable to me because we've met so many guests and talked about so many fascinating things.
Yeah, you've really underscored that, the show, Growing Together, gardening podcast, Growing Together, your column, Growing Together, that it's a communal thing that we all may have our own spaces.
We're all in it together, just trying to get our stuff to grow a little better.
But sharing that kind of knowledge, learning from other people. You say that what's your days lost? That it's
count the day lost. You don't learn something new, and I've learned a lot on this. Some of our guests have just been amazing. John Wheeler, a meteorologist. I love it. Of course, weather and gardening go together so closely.
Yep.
So it's been fascinating to hear his inputs on weather and how it affects gardening and everything.
Well, and also as somebody who's not from this area, he's from the South. So the things that he thought of as gardening and trying to find things like that up here, or trying to do that, that's been great. Mary Holm, I never met Mary Holm until you had her on the podcast.
She's
been
fun
on a couple
to visit
times.
With. She's like a comfortable old shoe.
She made,
I mean, not in age, but
no.
She's just so down to earth and just such a wonderful gardener.
Every time I have her on, we have her on the show. It just seems like we should be having pie and coffee. And one time
Absolutely.
she did bring in kuchen for us.
She did. That was a treat.
So today I brought in treats for us and also to share. But we've had a lot of great guests from
Rita
Baker Garden Gift.
Baker Garden Gift, the employees there, and Eric Baker from our office, Rita Usatis, talking about the home canning and things, and NDSU Todd West talking about new and different things. Hope Blooms. That was fun to do the remote out at Hope Blooms.
It's been great to get out of the podcast is nice here, but
I enjoyed seeing your yard and everything you've got growing.
Getting out into different spaces, going out and seeing your space and your yard, and exactly things like that we've got ideas for things that we want to do in the upcoming episodes, when we can get out into yards that aren't covered with snow as they are maybe right now. But it's been a lot of fun, and we've got a lot more fun planned, don't we?
Oh, we do. Yes. Here's to another 100 episodes.
And today was kind of like maybe not kind of a greatest hits, but you've got a rundown, don't you? A special rundown.
Well, there's all kinds of tidbits, that gardeners use. And of course, a lot of these, we're going to talk about at least 50 different gardening tidbits. And so these kind of were drawn from things we've mentioned in the past 100 or 99 podcasts. And so, I thought it'd be kind of fun to go through just a bunch of random gardening type things because, we'll soon be entering this gardening season.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of fun to keep these things in mind. And so most of these we've talked about in the past episodes. But for example, here's one. Now, if you plant asparagus and rhubarb, let them grow for 2 full growing seasons before you harvest that third season. So patience is our friend in gardening.
Well, before we get too far down that list, you've got a letter.
Yes.
We really appreciate you. You get the letters. They're addressed to you because you are the one with the knowledge here on the show. But so what's the letter this week?
I appreciate people writing in. And Ellen wrote in with a wonderful question. For any of us who start seeds in our homes, I start ours in a basement under lights. Well, anyway, Ellen writes, I'm going to start seeds for the first time, and I've heard you mention that heat mats work very well. How long do we leave the seed tray on the heat mat? Wonderful question. So, to answer that, of course, the heat mats spur the germination. So, I wouldn't want to be without them. I've got about 4 of them. You can order them online, or garden centers sell them. They're specially created to put trays of seeds on in order to get them to sprout better.
And they don't get too hot. This is a very this is a measured. They're temperature controlled.
Yeah. So that there are some very fancy ones that actually have a thermostat you can set, but the others without the thermostat, which are the ones I have, are without a thermostat. They just automatically are at that temperature that gives some bottom heat, and it keeps those trays of seeds nicely warm, and that really encourages the sprouting and the germination. So how long should you leave that tray that you've newly seeded? How long should it remain on that heat pad? So as soon as most of the seeds appear to have sprouted, emerged out of the seeding mix, and the first leaves have kind of expanded out, then it's time to take them off of the heat mat and give them slightly cooler. Now, for germination, those heat mats are probably going to keep the seeding mix somewhere between about 72 to 78 degrees, so fairly warm. But once they've sprouted, seedlings need to have it a little cooler, more like 65 to 70 degrees. So if kept on the heat mat, it could actually kind of cook the seedlings, and so take them off. And of course, a key at that point is to be sure that they're getting plenty of good light. So thanks again, Ellen, for that question.
You know, a question I had, somebody asked me, and bring this up now because it's timely. We're kind of getting out of a real cold snap. And we talked about this last year, but with the relatively lack of snow, we haven't had a whole lot of snow, which we like in winter because it provides this kind of insulating blanket for our plants in the grounds. But we haven't had a whole lot of snow. But also with this cold snap, are you concerned at all about some dieback and danger of winter damage?
I am, because snow is a really friendly insulation. How do you like that term, friendly? For plants, it's very friendly. You know, when I'm trying to snow blow it and shovel it, it's maybe not quite as friendly. But I always hope for the right amount of snow. How is that the right amount? You know, we don't need like 96, 97. We don't need 10 feet of snow.
Right.
But, you know, a couple of feet, 24 inches of insulation would really help our perennials and our trees and shrubs, things like strawberry plants. That, 18 to 24 inches of snow mulch would really help. So when we don't have that and we get, 20, 30 below, I'm concerned about some of our things because the frost does go deeper into the ground when we don't have enough insulation. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. If we had had a crystal ball in the fall, we could have maybe mounded a little extra leaves or straw around some of our more tender type things. I grow Canadian winter hardy roses. They don't require protection, but if we have a very cold winter without much snow cover, they can even freeze back a ways, kind of down to the snow line. So the more snow, the less dieback you have. So at this point, I'm optimistic, but I think we might see a little more dieback on some things than we would if we had had more snow and less cold.
Well, hopefully it'll be warming up over the next couple of weeks, and we can really start thinking of gardening. And you've got some more tips for us, right?
We do. So let's run through just a bunch of tidbits that we can kind of look forward to. So
you brought in 50. This is kind of like your top 50.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and some of them are a little more random than others, but that's okay. So if late spring frost threatens, and you need to cover things, things have already kind of started growing and we're going to get a late spring frost, maybe late May or even early June. Many of us are out covering things that might have come up already. Well, anyway, cloth and newspaper will be a better cover when frost threatens instead of plastic. Plastic is chilly and cold, so I wouldn't want to wear a plastic coat in winter. So anytime you need to cover something to protect from frost, cloth and newspaper. All right, now buying spring garden seeds. They're out on the racks and maybe you order from the mail order catalogs. Get some extra radish, lettuce, beets, spinach. because after the first crop is all done, you can plant another crop. And sometimes the seed racks have already disappeared.
Yeah.
So buy yourself some to plant a little bit later in the season.
Good tip.
Well, the next one is if you're starting some new strawberry plants, if you plan to this spring, remember to remove the blossoms on those new plants for at least the first half of the growing season. You want the energy to go into rooting and establishment instead of those blossoms. Now, when we're looking to buy tomato plants, look for those that have a good deep green color. If when you're shopping for tomato plants, if they're kind of yellowish, that means there's a little starved for nutrition. If you fertilize them, they'd come out of it, but why not start with a good, healthy green plant?
You're going to buy healthy.
Exactly. And now, when you do transplant those, whether it's tomatoes or vegetables or even flower transplants that you're planting out, give them a little bit of water-soluble fertilizer as a starter fertilizer. That'll encourage the roots and get them off growing well. So fertilize. And next, when our little carrots and radishes and lettuce are all sprouting in the garden, make sure you thin them out. If they come up too thick, they'll outcompete each other and no plant will do its best. So thin them kind of an inch apart is my rule of thumb. For most things, imagine a carrot. A carrot needs at least an inch of space to develop that carrot downward. If they're like hair on a dog's back, they're going to stay about that. The roots are going to stay about that size too. All right, well, let's talk about lawns. The recommended, as we've mentioned in previous podcasts, the recommended height on a lawn to keep it mowed is 3 inches. So right away in the spring, you could give the first mowing a little shorter just to kind of clean things up. But then fairly quickly in the spring, set your lawnmower to 3 inches.
It'll be exciting when we start hearing lawnmowers again, won't it?
Gosh, I can't wait for that smell of new mown grass again.
Yeah.
Isn't that going to be a treat?
It'll be good.
And it's not too long until apple planting and apple blooming season. Now, to get fruit on apples, you need 2 different named cultivars. So 2 Haraldsons aren't going to pollinate each other. It's got to be a Honeycrisp and a Haraldson. Maybe your neighbor has an apple tree. That's going to work. Flowering crab apples work too. So we just need 2 different types of apples. Do you have a clematis vine?
I have a couple.
Oh, awesome. And clematis help teach us patience.
Yeah.
Because as I think we mentioned in previous podcasts, patience is always great. That's our friend. Now, a clematis vine takes up to really about 3 years to root in and establish to a point where you get multiple shoots coming up out of it, and that's when it can fill up the trellis well. So don't be alarmed if the first season looks kind of wimpy. Second season, still pretty wimpy. But the third and fourth season, then you've got it, and it's going to be there for a long, long time.
Excellent. Well, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we'll have more of your 50 tips for gardening.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, we're back. We're talking about, Don's got a list of 50 tips to look out for on this, our 100th episode. We thought it'd be kind of a fun, quick hitter to look at some quick tips for gardening. And we were talking about clematis. There's some more things to know about clematis.
Yes, we've talked in podcasts about mulching, the importance of mulching, conserves moisture, keeps the roots cool. Clematis love being mulched. So up to about a foot of nice mulch, shaved wood bark mulch, could be leaves that you raked from last year, but a mulch, even straw, that would work well. It keeps the clematis nice and it keeps the roots cool. Clematis love it. And now in last week's podcast, we defined pinching. We did gardening terms. We defined pinching. And clematis love to have the central growing point pinched. So when the shoots start growing, emerging kind of from the ground in May, if at each of those growing points where the vines are coming up, if you pinch out that central growing point, I learned this from my mom about, 60 years ago maybe. If you pinch out that central growing point where there was one shoot coming up out of that. You pinch it, and very shortly, 2 arise from that point. The pinching causes 2. And so just by pinching the ends of those in May, you've doubled the amount of vine that comes up. So I love that tip. Okay, next, be careful when a rose label says it's hardy. Because hardy for Atlanta isn't the same as hardy for North Dakota, Minnesota. And so be sure that it's truly winter hardy for our hardiness zone. And okay, the next tip is we've talked about the Canadian roses. And I love those that were developed in Canada because one of their key ingredients was that they were winter hardy. And so I love the Canadian developed roses. So visit your local garden centers, and usually that's listed as a selling point, Canadian developed. Okay, peonies. We've talked about peonies and how long they can last. I love peonies. They do take some patience to get established, but once they're there, they can be there for 100 years.
Yeah.
And next, we've talked about potting soil in outdoor containers. Do you have to start with new potting soil each year? Some of these outdoor containers are really big.
Yeah.
And no, you don't need to totally throw that out and start fresh. Mary and I have used some of the same soil in our pots and containers for, 7-8 years. But remove about 1/4, blend in some new, and then you're good to go.
Yeah,
But remove the plants in the fall, like we've talked about.
Yeah, I particularly like using the older mix, especially towards the bottom. Where,
Exactly.
But you really do want, like you were saying, you want the newer mix of soil, gardening soil up there towards the top,
Sure.
the potting mix at the top.
And if you're starting some new containers, because none of us have enough containers, do we?
Right. There's always more out there.
We need more. And so when you get a new container, well, then, take some of the old mix out of the others, stick that in the bottom, and then fill it up with some good stuff. And flowers growing in containers by the front door is a simple way to make your home look really inviting. And, so just those pots of flowers up by the front door automatically makes your whole landscape look inviting.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the use of those. And our flowers outdoors, especially geraniums, are heavy feeders. So geraniums really respond well to weekly fertilizing, or at most 2 weeks. Don't go longer than an interval of 2 weeks without fertilizing geraniums. Otherwise, if they run out of nutrition, they won't bloom as well.
Yeah.
Next, when you're planting annual flowers in the spring. Now, this is a tough one until you become accustomed to it. But when planting annual flowers out, pinch off the first blooms. Okay, so whether you've grown your own from seed and they've started to blossom, or you go to the garden center and the 4-pack of petunias is blooming so nice. So when you get them home, you're ready to plant them, remove all the blossoms.
Yeah, that sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it sounds like, oh, man. But I learned this from my mom. It kind of freaked me out because she'd take a scissors and cut off all the blossoms. I thought, my gosh, you're cutting off all the good stuff. But she knew, and of course, so I've done this ever since because I saw that it worked. Okay, she knew that those blossoms on that young plant were taking away the energy. And we want that plant to root in and get bigger so that eventually you'll have more blossoms. So instead of preserving that 1 or 2 wimpy little blossoms on that new little petunia plant, just cut them off. And many of the nice display gardens, that's what they do. They shear off all the blossoms when they're planting them out, because then that energy will go into creating a bigger plant. So eventually you'll have a much more productive plant. So I love that tip. And we used to get this question in the greenhouse a lot, and I know we've covered this in a podcast. So it's fun to shop at a garden center early while the selection's good. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you buy some vegetable plants and some packs of flowers, but you're not ready to plant them. A common question we used to get is it okay if I just keep these in the garage for a couple of weeks? And the answer is no. These have all been grown in big, bright greenhouses, and we don't want them to languish in a dimly lit garage. So if you're not ready to plant them, use that time to harden them off. We've talked about hardening off in podcasts, and harden them off put them in a protected spot outside, but let them get some exposure to wind and a little sunlight, and it'll toughen those plants in so that when you are ready to plant them, they'll actually be a sturdier plant. Now, let's see, the next one is coming up on spring. Perennials and roses and shrubs all like to be fertilized in May and June. So one fertilizing in May, fertilizing in June. Could be water-soluble type or an all-purpose granular like 10-10-10, but May and June. So I like to get my fertilizer bought ahead. I might even buy some now, so I've got it ready, because once spring hits, sometimes we don't have time to go out and buy all this stuff. And tree wraps, where we've mentioned the importance of wrapping apple trees, especially fruit trees, in the fall of the year. But in the spring, when plants wake up, I suppose we're talking about maybe end of April, 1st of May, and we should remove those tree wraps for the summertime because that bark needs to be exposed to the air and sunlight. So get those off for sure by the end of April. And pruning hedges. Hedges, kind of the formal, a hedge is kind of defined as the same type of plant planted in multiples, so you've got a whole row of the same type of thing. Now, it could be informal where you don't trim it, but it can be the formal sheared hedge. And if you are shearing a hedge, make sure that the bottom is wider than the top.
Okay.
And then the bottom will catch more sunlight and it will not get as leggy.
That's a good one. I did not know that one.
Yeah. I don't think we talked about that. We maybe all have to do a whole podcast on that. Oh, and I know we have talked about this one. Check the width of new shrubs to see what their mature width is going to be, because we've talked about planting things too close, and we've all done it. Because those shrubs look so cute when they're tiny. And it's easy to plant new things way too close because you want kind of looking more filled in immediately. But then in a few years, it's all too crowded. So check the width on the label of what that shrub is going to be, and then give it that footprint of space. And young trees, shrubs would be the same way. Young trees especially will grow more quickly if the grass is kept away from them. So mulching with a circle. I believe we've talked about the 5-5-5 rule of mulching around trees. And that is a circle 5 feet wide in diameter of mulch that's 5 inches thick, and keep it 5 inches away from the trunk so it doesn't rot the trunk. So mulch is definitely a good friend of young trees. It'll double the increase growth, double the rate of growth on it. Now, have you ever planted garlic?
We haven't tried growing garlic.
Tried to grow garlic? No. It's interesting. Garlic doesn't do nearly as well if you plant it in the spring. Garlic is planted in the fall of the year. And so garden centers sell the bulbs in the fall of the year. You plant it in the fall of the year, at least by October. And winter's well, it kind of needs that winter and then grows. And then the following late summer, ready for harvesting. So, and we've talked a lot about blossom end rot, the disorder on tomatoes, but mulching is the best way to prevent that disorder. It's not really a disease. It's caused by the inability of the plant to take up calcium, which is moisture linked. And anyway, mulching around our tomatoes is a great way to prevent the blossom end rot. Now, when we're shopping for tomatoes, either for the seed, we've talked about starting seed for tomatoes about April 1st. So there's still time to order seed for those if you want to start your own. But if you're looking at the days on tomatoes, it's interesting. A few podcasts ago, we talked about the burpee tomato that they say you can just drop the seed into the garden outdoors instead of using starter plants. And I'm going to try that. But I got to get cracking because I haven't ordered those seeds yet.
Okay.
And so anyway, customarily, though, you plant out starter plants. And if they're listed at 65 to 75 days, those are the ones that are best main season tomatoes for us. So look for about 65 to 75 days. If you want some early little ones, you can go for lesser days than 65. Now, I've enjoyed this one over the years. are ants needed to open peony buds?
We've talked about some kind of not urban legends, but kind of old wives' tales and folklore and things like that.
That was one of them. And so one of the old myths is your peony buds won't open if you don't have ants on them. And that's not true. That was easy research to do. All they had to do was put some peony plants in a closed-in environment where ants could not get in, and the buds open just fine. And the ants are often associated with peony buds because the peony buds have kind of a stickiness, a sweet, kind of syrupy material on the outside, and ants love that. So they're often in close association, but they don't need each other.
Yeah.
And another important tip is that lilacs, if you want them to bloom each year, you do the pruning right after blossoming. And but if you want to totally rejuvenate a lilac, then you can do it in early spring before the growth starts. Another wonderful tip is tulips will be blooming soon.
Speaking of spring.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you want them to each year continue to bloom, it's very important to re-energize those bulbs. And the best way to do that is to fertilize them in the spring. And about the time that they're blooming and have good leaves, that fertilizer will help to get that bulb to produce a flower bud internally for the next spring. You see, tulips are always thinking a year and ahead.
Yeah.
They've got to energize themselves for the following spring. If you don't fertilize, they just kind of run out of nutrition and they may not do much the next year for you.
And that's why you also keep the leaves on, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So you don't remove the leaves on tulips until they've totally browned down and become dry, and then you can take them
because
off.
Then they're gathering that energy from the sun. They're storing that energy for next year.
Exactly. And, when I started writing the garden columns for Forum Communications, let's see, that would be about maybe 13, 14 years ago, one of the first articles I did was The Mystery of the Murdered Tree.
Yes.
And the murderer on this tree that I discovered, which was actually at one of the local school grounds, it had been killed by cumulative damage from mowers and trimmers, and there was just a very visible damage to the lower part of the tree where mowers had nicked it, trimmers had knocked bark off, and eventually that tree died. I followed the history of that tree, and well, it's no longer with us.
Yeah.
And it was a shame because it was just totally human caused.
Yeah.
And so that's another good reason for putting mulch around trees so that we don't have to get that close with the trimmers.
All right. This has been great. Let's take another quick break and we'll come back. A couple more tips.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we were back and we were talking about some tips for things to do in your garden, but you've got some as kind of a bonus. You've got a couple things to keep an eye out for, things not to do, things to look out
exactly.
for.
I like to always stay positive,
right.
The things we can do. Yeah. Well, sometimes we need to look at things that we should not do also. And of course, one of those not to do's is to get fooled by an early spring. I know it's fun when spring arrives early and we can do some things, pruning, etc. But even if we get a really warm spring, don't be fooled. Our frosts, our spring-killing frosts, still come about the middle of May on the average. And so gardeners that are well experienced, anything that is sensitive to frost, that would be killed by frost, they usually wait to install the last half of May, even towards the end of May. So my mom taught me that years ago because she said as a young homemaker, it was a beautiful spring. She said she hadn't experienced gardening too much, so she just put everything out in April. Tomato plants, the whole works. And of course, you can tell what happened. Well, along comes May, everything froze. And so she remembered that well into her 90s. She was still reminding me not to plant too early.
I try to, and I'm going to try to do this and try to, because again, it's tempting to want to get out there and garden. I'm going to try to use that time to do the things physically, like move barriers.
That a person can be doing.
They can be doing. If you have to remove something like we've got a couple old plants that we know we want to get rid of. Let's remove those now.
A good time to divide. Spring's
yeah.
a great time to divide some perennials just as they're starting to grow.
Yeah.
The type that bloom midsummer on can be done. And we talked a little bit about the preferred mowing height of 3 inches, but the not to do is mowing it too short.
Right.
Because scalping a lawn, moisture evaporates more and the lawn really can deplete. Weeds get a much better toehold if you're mowing short. And next thing to avoid is skimping on soil improvement. Our soil is really, really heavy in the Red River Valley, so we need to keep incorporating organic material. Peat moss, compost, well-rotted manure, things such as that added in. And that's also the good antidote for soil that is too sandy. Maybe in the lakes area or points east of here, sometimes too sandy is the problem, and adding organic material is the way. And here's certainly a do not do, and that's letting weeds go to seed and letting them thrive. For example, one purslane can produce 240,000. Somebody must have actually measured these, 240,000 seeds, and they can be shot out of those seed pods to a distance of about 40 feet. So one purslane plant can seed a good-sized garden, and they're going to be with you for a long time, coming up each year.
Long time.
So anytime we can, don't let weeds multiply will be better. Okay, the next do not do is shallow watering of lawns. Frequent light sprinkling that doesn't get down into the root system encourages shallow roots. None of us want to be shallow, right. So we don't want to do that to our lawns either. And digging clay soil when it's wet. When it's too wet, and gummy, if you rototill it or work it with a shovel or spading fork, it develops hard golf ball lumps of clay. And so you can really, for the course of that growing season, kind of ruin your soil by working it when it's too wet. Now, one that seems a little bit random, but we've talked about this, and that is in a container, whether it's a houseplant or an outdoor container, fill the container up. Don't leave too deep of a head space, it's called. That's the distance between the rim of the pot and the top of the soil. Fill the container up. Make use of all that root space that there is. Give the plants good root space. And also the drainage is better because gravity in that higher soil volume will help pull the water down in better. So, and also there's less disease problems with plants in containers. If you don't have such a deep down in. So even outdoor containers, get the potting soil up there, closer to the rim, enough to leave a water reservoir, but don't plant those, don't have it way down in, if you follow me, that the top of the soil surface. And overwatering potted plants, that's a common problem, especially with house plants. Now, overwatering means that we keep the soil just continually too soggy, is what we mean by that, too frequent. Another common mistake that we can do is not checking plants' hardiness zones, especially if we're doing mail order type things. Some things look so pretty, but maybe they aren't quite adapted to our hardiness zone.
Sometimes you'll be in an area and you'll maybe if you're traveling or you're just outside of, you're just outside of our zone, you'll see something you think, oh, that would look great. That would be great. And it may not last. And sometimes even within our zone, sometimes some stores will carry things that are not recommended for our zone.
Exactly. And that reminds me, we are going to this spring have Charles Elhard on the program. He's with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture, and one of his duties is he checks garden centers, anyone who sells plants, for winter hardy plants. You see, if things are on a non-hardy list, they have to be denoted as such. So we're going to talk to him in a few weeks about the plants that he most commonly encounters at garden centers that are not hardy
That'll be good.
for our area. Okay, next is planting a tree too deeply.
Okay.
The uppermost, the flare root is only supposed to be a couple inches below soil. Okay, so how do you know the proper planting depth of a tree? Now, when, a tree has a natural flare at the bottom of the trunk, just kind of flares outward a bit. When you plant a tree, you should be able to see that flare at the point it goes into the ground. If it's going into the ground straight as a telephone pole, it's probably planted too deeply. You need to see that flaring out when you're all done. All right, and as long as we're talking about planting trees, another common mistake is failure to unwind the circling roots. Now, when you slip a tree out of its pot, you'll oftentimes see the roots are just in a circle because that's the way they've had to grow. And if you don't tease those roots apart or cut them, they can continue to grow in that circle and eventually just girdle and strangle the tree itself. It may take a number of years before it died, but it oftentimes will. So pull the roots, tease them apart, or cut the circling roots. Another common mistake is to go to garden center. See, and I've made most of these mistakes. Go to a garden center and then try to remember what the size was of that pot that you're trying to buy plants for.
Yeah.
Was it 18 inches or was it 24? And of course, the size of the pot determines how many plants you're going to need for it. So measure the pots. I need to write it down or I won't remember. Maybe take along the tape measure also so you can better estimate how many plants you need in that pot. Another common mistake is to use farm-type herbicides on home yards. Now, the label on these products is a legal document. And farm-type herbicides that are meant to be used on farm fields are not, in most cases, to be used on home yards. And they'll oftentimes indicate on that this may kill, on the label, this may kill thistles, but it's not for use on home yards. Because many of these are very potent, and if you use it not in accordance with label directions and you injure a bunch of stuff, for example, spray it and injure your neighbor's yard, you could be held liable for that. So kind of a serious type situation on farm type herbicides. Make sure you read the label. Now, another common mistake is to keeping soil exposed. Now, in nature, the very few soil areas are exposed. Forest floor, you get the leaves dropping and it kind of creates its own nice mulch. I suppose in a desert where nothing's growing, the soil is kind of exposed. But so we can use that same principle in our perennial flower beds, keeping them mulched in between plants. And in our vegetable garden, mulch works well to conserve moisture, reduce weeds. And so mulch is really a gardener's friend.
Yeah.
On that. Let's see, another good one is to avoid overhead sprinkling of flowers and vegetables, because the overhead sprinkling can create diseases. It can splash around disease organisms, and it can promote a disease on that. So watering just the soil is better and can help prevent disease. Another common mistake is if a plant is ailing, such as a house plant, will fertilizer help? Well, fertilizer isn't medicine for a sickly plant.
Right.
Fertilizer is meant to be applied to healthy plants to make them even healthier. Now, some things like iron added to a chlorotic tree, as we've talked about, that can help. But regular fertilizer is meant to be applied for healthy plants.
I mean, fertilizer is basically food, right? It's food of the plants. And if you were sick, or last week when I was sick, I didn't really necessarily want to eat a big meal.
Yeah,
so
you couldn't bring yourself out of that sickness just by having a huge meal.
Right.
That's not going to bring you out. Exactly. So in many cases, you actually have to kind of maybe taper down the diet a little bit, and that would be healthy. And another one is failure to save the plant tags when we buy a new plant. If we lose the identity, that doesn't help us know how to take care of that plant.
Right.
And also, if you want to share plants, such as a perennial, the people you share it with really would like to know, what's the name of that plant and how can I care for
There
it?
are so many different varieties of hostas, and we have so many varieties of hostas, and I don't know what most of them are. And so that is something that I should be better about doing.
Yep. And so labeling is really, or keeping track of them in a notebook. I think we all, myself included, need to get better at that. And my very last mistake that I'll mention today is the mistake of giving up. Count the day lost, you don't learn something new, and we're all learning. And so we never want to give up. Even if something doesn't work out for us, we learn from it. Maybe the plant was in the wrong space. Maybe it wasn't hardy for our area. But we never want to give up just because something didn't work out.
You talk about that we've talked about that too, that gardening is kind of humbling. You put a lot of work in, and a lot of times you do get a lot of payout. But sometimes, like you said, things just don't work out. And sometimes you'll realize the next time you look at it or upon further review, it didn't work out because of maybe something simple. Maybe there was something in the way there. Maybe whatever it was, didn't get enough light. Maybe you got too much water. Again, don't give up, because if you really like it, maybe you can learn a little bit more, find a better place for it, find a better situation for it, and you'll really love it.
Exactly. And a can-do attitude, just a calm can-do attitude goes a long way. And sometimes it's just the growing season. I think the worst vegetable garden last year that I've ever had, because it was way too wet too early and then turned hot and dry. But next year is always going to be better.
Right.
The other thing, if you're somewhat new to gardening, you're not alone. We are all new gardeners. And here's why we're all new gardeners, because the upcoming growing season is new to all of us. It's impossible for the upcoming growing season to be exactly like any other. The moisture, the temperatures on certain given days, the amount of heat, amount of coolness, the amount of moisture in a certain time is not going to be like anything we've had before. That's almost statistically impossible. So we are all approaching the upcoming growing season as new gardeners. I don't know what to expect. I don't know how I'm going to respond. Okay, if it's too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold, what am I going to have to do? If the weeds start growing more than they did some other years, how am I going to respond? So I'm a new gardener to the upcoming growing season. So we're all in this together.
We are. And Don, thank you again for coming by. It's always great. It's been a great past 100 episodes, and I'm looking forward to 100 plus more episodes of learning more from you and hearing from our listeners. And so if people want to reach out to you, if they've got a question for you about something going on in their garden or something that they want to try gardening, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yes, keep the emails coming. Donald.Kinsler, spelled Kinzler, Donald.Kinsler@ndsu.edu. And it's just awesome to hear from you. If you have any suggestions for upcoming podcasts, let us know. It's always great to hear.
All right. Well, Don, take care.
Yes, and happy anniversary again.
Happy
John
anniversary.
Brought cookies.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you,
I'm going to send
John.
you some home with some.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.